The Holy Gospel is written in the book of Luke, chapter 15.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling, saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would have gladly filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. When Pastor Nikki asked me if I'd fill in for her today, I looked at the scriptures and said, oh boy, the prodigal son. I've got this one wrapped up. No problem. I've done devotions on this. I know this story inside and out. Great, I'll do it. So I told Pastor Nikki, it's the prodigal son. Of course, I want to be able to speak on this. And she said, "Oh, I hadn't read it that far ahead. The prodigal son, I've got a book for you." And I was like, oh boy. And she said, "Well, it's not very big, and it's a pretty easy read." So she gave me this book, and it's called The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry J.M. Newman. And it's only 140 pages. But those 140 pages totally changed my thought process of the young prodigal son, the older son who stayed at home, and the father himself. The basic premise of the book is based around the painting of The Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. And the author goes into detail about Rembrandt's painting and Rembrandt's life alongside the actual story of the prodigal son. So it was somewhat interesting. The author caught a glimpse of the poster painting that turned into almost an obsession for him. He even took a trip to see it in the gallery and spent 4 hours gazing at the picture. And from that, it took him on a spiritual adventure for several years. And his adventure has been toying with my mind for the last couple of weeks. And as I kept reading, I started thinking, who do I relate to most in this parable? So let's look at the characters involved in this story. There's 2 sons and a father. Now we know that the family was not a poor family because the younger son knew that he would have an inheritance. So the young son was like many young sons are when they're coming about that age. Sometimes sons and daughters, as they are reaching adulthood, often feel like they've got it all figured out. Now, they have no experience behind that, but they've got it figured out, and there's better ways to do things. And they don't really want to listen to the experience. They get tired of working hard, and they want to do their own plan. And that's how the son was looking here. And so he asks his father for the inheritance, and his father gives it to him. One of the side stories that really struck a chord with me as I was looking at the younger son was a story from a pastor named Kenneth Bailey. Now, Kenneth Bailey spoke to many people of many different ways of life, from Morocco to India to Turkey to Sudan, asking about the implications of a son's request for his inheritance while the father is still living. And he said that the answers were always the same. The conversation went sort of like this through most of them. It said, "Has anyone ever made a request like this in your village?" And they would say, "Never." "Could anyone ever make such a request?" "Impossible." "If anyone ever did, what would happen?" "His father would beat him, of course." "Well, why?" And this is what sort of started sticking with me. The answer was, the request means he wants his father to die. So in this story, the younger son is not only asking for the division of inheritance, but also the right to dispose of his part. So the act of the son leaving was even more offensive than it seems to the first read. But who of us, as children of God, haven't at one time or another said, "You know, God, I know you want what's best for me, but I don't want to wait on your timing. I want to get this done now. And I think I'm going to do it my own way, okay?" Or, "I know you're in control, but I can't stop thinking and simmering and stewing and worrying about this. We can do it together. I'll worry, you do it. You do it, I'll worry about it." So the son goes on and does what he wants. He spends his money on whatever he wants and soon finds that he has squandered every last bit of what he has. So he finds himself in a very low place that he has to find work. And with a famine in the area, he has to find work to feed the pigs. And he's at such a low spot in his life that the food that he is giving to the pigs looks like a feast to him. He then starts thinking that his father's servants have it better than him at this moment, and that at that moment, he then realizes he must go home and beg his father for a job in his fields because he doesn't deserve to be considered his son. So the son makes his way home, and as he's still on the road, the father comes and greets him and tells his servant to kill the fattened calf and prepare a grand feast, for his son, whom was dead, has now come home alive. More than any other story in the gospel, the parable of the prodigal son expresses the boundless love of the boundlessness of God's compassionate love. No matter what happened, the father in this story rejoices when the son who was lost is now found, just as our heavenly Father rejoices when his children return to him. Oops. Even in all our need to be connected to and loved by God, God desires to be connected to and loved by us. So let's move on to our second character in this story, the older son. Most of us would probably at first glance see him as the responsible, dependable older son, the one that stayed behind and worked tirelessly beside his father despite the fact that his brother left. He kept things moving, and the estate was still thriving because he poured everything he had into the family land and stayed right beside his father. Noble and dependable, right? We can think all those things until we see what happens when the younger son returns home. Just picture it in your mind. He's been out in the field all day. He's tired. And as he's walking closer and closer to the house, he hears music and laughter and loudness. He asks one of the workers that's out and about what's going on. And when they say, "Your brother has returned," we see the true heart of the older brother. He has come back. I can just imagine that he was probably so angry that he couldn't even say his name. And my father has not only allowed his return, but is throwing a party in his honor, of all things. I've been working day and night to keep this family together. I've given up so much. And he goes and squanders half of what we have had and thinks he can just walk back in with no consequences and live off of my half that I have worked so hard to keep going. In this small bit, we see the older brother. We can see the resentment that the older brother has, not only for the younger brother, but also for his father. He refuses to enter the party and rejoice and celebrate because he can't see past the sin that was committed. Can any of you relate to the older brother? You work your whole life seeking the will of God. You go to church. You work hard, maybe even 2 or more jobs to support your family. You live an honest life, and then you see people who don't deserve it get the breaks that you hope for. Resentment, self-righteousness, jealousy, or maybe even a deeper complaint that comes from the heart that feels like it never does receive what's due. But bigger still, the older son has lost his joy. He's just treading water every day and forgot how to be joyful. The father comes to the older son, and in verses 31 and 32 says, "Son, you are always with me, and everything that is mine is yours." But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. The father is not discounting all the older son has done. He knows that he has been faithful to him and his household, but he wants the older son to see that his younger son was lost to him forever. and that loss was very deep and painful for him. But his son found his way back, and that is cause for celebration and rejoicing. Just as the father went to the younger son in our story, he also goes to the older son. He doesn't love the younger son any more than the older son. He loves them both with an unconditional love. Going back to the book that has brought so many new thoughts to my mind, Nguyen states that he could relate to both these sons, but his ultimate goal is that he could relate to the father. Listen to this paragraph. But what of the father? Why pay so much attention to the sons when it is the father who is in the center, and when it is the father who I am to identify? Why talk so much about being like the sons when the real question is, are you interested in being like the father? It feels somehow good to be able to say, these sons are like me. It gives a sense of being understood. But how does it feel to say, the father is like me? Do I want to be like the father? Do I want to be not just the one who is forgiven, but also the one who forgives? Not just the one who is being welcomed, but also the one who welcomes home. Not just the one who receives compassion, but the one who offers it as well. We've been given a great gift of having a loving Father who longs to be in communion with us and misses us when we are not close. And when we do turn back to him, he runs to us and welcomes us back with open arms, no matter what, because what was lost has been found. I challenge you today to think about those people that you can show the love of the Father to. The unconditional love and compassion. Maybe it's someone in your family, or someone that you work with, or someone just in the community. Find those people and show them God's love. Amen.